I'm Steph Ceraso, and I focused on the sound for this. But first I just wanted to thank Jim Brown for the invitation and the Digital Studies Center for their financial support. Rutgers actually bought me a boombox, which was like the best moment of my academic life when it arrived at my door, so thank you so much. The title of my talk is Art Lives, the Generative Nature of Fandom. And I thought I'd start with a little context. So sound is one of my primary research interests, and I was extremely excited to see 2 cassette tapes when I opened my copy of Uncle Buddy's Phantom Funhouse. Before I even installed HyperCADE on my computer, I spent hours listening to these tapes. I became fascinated with Art and/or Buddy Newkirk, a wise, wry, struggling songwriter. And while listening, I was also aware from reading Eastgate System's description of the novel that Art/Buddy was now gone. Maybe missing, maybe dead, we don't know. This mystery fueled my desire to figure him out. I became increasingly intrigued by his songs, and by the time I sat down to engage with the textual parts of his literary estate, I was already a full-fledged fan of this fictional character and his weird music. A few significant non-fictional things also happened during the months that I spent with Uncle Buddy's literary estate and the cassettes. Most notably, several high-profile musicians died, and today Prince. So among them, David Bowie, Glenn Frey of the Eagles, Dale Griffin, the drummer from Mott the Hoople. Bowie was a formative musical figure in my teen years, so his death hit me the hardest. In the days and months after his passing, I was touched by the surge of tributes and fan art, drawings, photos, collages, remixes, playlists, and more that plastered the internet. When a beloved musician dies, fans invest a ton of time and energy remembering and celebrating them. What I find striking is that this remembering and celebrating often takes the form of creating or remaking physical and digital objects that are inspired by the musician. So also during the same time period as my Bowie and Art Newkirk obsessions, I also happened to be reading Carrie Brownstein's memoir, Hunger Makes Me a Modern Girl. She writes a lot about what it means to be a fan in the book, and the subject also came up frequently during the book tour. In an article about Brownstein's tour, one quote really jumped out and grabbed me. She says, "Fandom wasn't a passive decision for me. It was a transformative state and a part of creativity." When I read that line, the thoughts about dead rock stars, music, and fans that had been swirling around in my brain for weeks seemed to snap into place. All of those Bowie fans weren't just celebrating him, they were keeping him alive. More than that, by remaking and remixing Bowie's songs, image, and ideas, fans were transforming his work. They were giving it a life of its own. That's exactly what I wanted to attempt to do for Uncle Buddy's Phantom Funhouse. Riffing off of the notion that fandom is a generative, creative process, I decided to compose a fan archive for Art and his band, the Reptiles. Constructing a fan archive seems especially appropriate for the R-CADE Symposium, an event that keeps digital artifacts alive by encouraging people to play with them. Indeed, the preservation of digital culture is an extension of fan culture. Fans do the work of preserving digital artifacts by continuing to interact with, recreate, and repurpose these things. So in addition to being cultural custodians of sorts, fans enable art and artists, broadly conceived, to have significance long after their initial hype. So for the remainder of my talk, I'd like to share and explain the artifacts I designed for this project. My fan archive is a piecemeal collection of DIY fan materials, fake merchandise, and memorabilia that lacks any real coherence or sense of completeness. Much like Uncle Buddy's Phantom Funhouse, the archive cannot possibly tell us the whole story of Art Newkirk or the Reptiles. We're left to our own devices to find connections and fill in meaning where there is none. This search for meaning was both a challenge and a pleasure. I spent hours sifting through Buddy's literary estate, looking for clues about who he was and what he stood for, things that might shed light on his writing or music. I never came to any satisfying answers, which is kind of the whole point. I let myself get lost in the Funhouse, and the getting lost turned out to be the fun part. So onto the archive, and I have to kind of click through these a little bit quickly due to time constraints. I did make a lot, and this isn't all of it, but you will be able to eventually see this hopefully on the R-CADE website. So I began constructing this archive by collecting hundreds of what I found to be remarkable or odd or hilarious phrases from Buddy's writing. After choosing my favorites, I repurposed these words by giving them a new delivery system. So for example, I created a series of punk pins with some of them. I also wanted to make some contemporary digital fan materials with my collection of Buddy's writing. Obviously, the historical moment when you encounter something makes a huge difference in how you think about it. Being a fan in 2016 is not the same as being a fan in 1992, the year Uncle Buddy's was published. So for example, I found so much of Art's writing to be meme-worthy. And I'll just click, and he does mention memes in the book as well, but I'll just click through some of the memes that I made during this project.
There you go.
That's my favorite one. So I could have gone on and made, this whole book could have been a meme. So as a fan in 2016, it was also much easier to create professional-looking fake merchandise for Art's band, the Reptiles. With so many available options and templates on the internet, I was able to make some inexpensive, legit-looking artifacts. And I did bring physical artifacts with me that are around if you'd like to see them later. But I made a series of t-shirts, some postcards, and Reptiles bumper stickers. So in some ways, my archive is less DIY than a fan archive from the early 90s might be. However, I did try to tap into my 90s teenage fangirl self by creating some amateur artifacts. And these actually resemble things that I did make and display in my high school bedroom. So this is a list of possible band names derived from Art's writing. And though I've never had a band of my own, I used to come up with band names all of the time, often based on lyrics from bands I liked or from books I liked. In addition to replicating one of my own small acts of teenage fandom, this artifact reflects a larger cultural practice. Referencing existing art or artists by adopting and recontextualizing their words or images or sounds is one of the most familiar ways that art lives on and incites new forms of creativity. So Uncle Buddy's Fan of Funhouse is built on this kind of intertextuality, so I wanted all the artifacts in my fan archive to reflect that. As Art Newkirk himself writes, the act of borrowing and restating is crucial. I resurrected a few other teenage practices for this project. For instance, I used to frame inspirational, provocative ideas from music or novels, like these ones, and put them in my room or in my locker. I also used to love to write on old records and use them as wall hangings. And here I was playing with the idea of music as a time machine, since time is such a key theme in McDaid's work. Go back one. So these are a few posters I made by enlarging screenshots of the images from Uncle Buddy's Fan of Funhouse. In the early days of the internet, I thought it was so amazing that you could find images of the bands you liked and print them at home. So these represent sort of the kind of computer-generated artifacts you might find in a 90s era fan bedroom. And I also created one historically specific poster. This lizard character is from the work of Von Bodie, an underground cartoonist that Buddy cites as one of the reasons his band was named the Reptiles. And the Jabberwocky is, of course, the Syracuse club where the Reps used to play. And this artifact is meant to be a handmade vintage flyer from one of their early shows, the kind of thing that might be worth a lot of money to diehard fans on eBay. I also experimented with making some digital audio artifacts. Another result of creating this fan archive in 2016 was having access to open source digital audio editors and MP3 versions of the cassettes. So for example, and I did a series of these, but this one's Art and Bob Dylan. It's cited Bob Dylan as a big influence, and I thought it'd be fun to put Bob and Buddy into conversation to sort of amplify some of their thematic and stylistic similarities. So I'll just play you a little bit of this.
We lived our lives in the public eye like a genius gone insane. This understanding all we see. Battle outside raging, bursting, shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are changing. When the end finally came, it was like a whirlpool in the crane, tearing through whatever's left of me. And admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time will be worth saving, we cannot speak, we cannot touch, there are walls around us now, 300,000 meters seconds high. And you better stop swimming or you'll sink like a
So I did a couple of those with the Grateful Dead as well and other influences that are in the archive. But my favorite piece of sound art that I created for this was actually an audible representation of a Mobius strip, a surface with only one side and one boundary. The Mobius strip is an important symbol in John Barth's Lost in the Funhouse, which is referenced explicitly in McDaid's hypermedia novel. In fact, Barth opens his collection with a piece called Frame Tale, which is an actual Mobius strip that you have to cut and paste to make the story. So this symbol represents the fact that there is no linear progression in Barth's or McDaid's funhouses. There's only recursivity and reflection. What I love most about the Mobius, though, is that it's both closed and endless, contained and full of possibilities. In this sense, it's a perfect symbol for a hypermedia novel. So I thought that making a Mobius strip of some kind would be a creative and meaningful addition to the fan archive. When I began thinking about this project, I remembered reading in one of my sound art books, I didn't make that, that Christian Hartley once built a Mobius strip out of whole cassette tapes, seen here, but I wanted to figure out if it was possible to actually compose an audible Mobius strip. It is, and it was really hard. I ended up learning to make a digital version of what a cassette tape Mobius strip would sound like because I didn't have access to a reel-to-reel tape player. But in order to do this, I needed to study the mechanics of cassette tapes, even though this was a digital thing. And here I want to thank Dr. Carolyn Kyler, who provided me with detailed lessons about how both Mobius strips and cassette tapes work. So I'll try to break this down so you can understand what you're about to hear. So the first thing I needed to figure out was how cassette tapes work, because I really never paid attention. So each side of a cassette tape resembles a two-lane highway. So if we just took the tape out and laid it flat, it would look something like this. Side A is the lane traveling one way, side B travels the opposite way. The head of a cassette player plays one lane in one direction. When you flip the tape, it plays the other lane in the other direction. So Carolyn made me these paper models to kind of explain this to me, as she made a Mobius strip out of them, just by making a loop and a half twist. Now, if you play this tape one lane at a time, the sound will switch between side A and side B, between playing forward and backward, and between playing the right side of the tape and the wrong side of the tape. So if we start with side A, the red side here, because of the way the Mobius twists, you'll hear the side B of the tape in reverse and on the wrong side. I also found out that when you play the wrong side of a tape, you get a muffled version of the original sound. And that's because the magnetic head, that wheel-like thing that moves the tape around, would pick up some of the magnetic signal through the tape and diminish the sound. So when you hear a softer backwards playing song, you're hearing side B. And if I were to play you one lane of this paper Mobius strip, basically it would work like the formula I have at the top here. So you'd hear A side forward, then B wrong side backward, A forward, B backward, forever and ever. So that's how the audible Mobius strip works conceptually. But in order to do this experiment with digital audio, I needed to figure out how long of a piece of tape I wanted to represent. And I chose a very short section of audio, around 6.4 seconds, which is equal to about 1 foot of tape, about the length that Carolyn used in these paper models. Using my boombox, I fast-forwarded to a song in the middle of the cassette tape, played it for 6.4 seconds, flipped the tape, played another 6.4 seconds, made note of where these started and stopped, and then recreated this section of tape with MP3s of the songs. And then I had to manipulate them to sound how the Mobius strip of tape would actually sound. So what you're about to hear is an audible Mobius strip that includes part of the song Walking Alone, Come Along from side A of Emily and the Time Machine, and part of the song Falling Apart from side B. So this is if we were following the red part of the tape.
Walk away, knowing I'm never coming back. Walk away, knowing I'm never coming back.
And then if we did side B, right, the blue side of the tape, it would just be the opposite formula. So these audible Mobius strips were by far the most difficult part of the fan archive to conceptualize, but I think they're also the most significant artifacts in the collection. To my mind, they serve as sonic representations of what it's like to interact with Uncle Buddy's Fandom Funhouse. The sounds of these Mobius strips perform the iterative, perplexing experience of getting lost in art's literary estate. So that concludes your brief tour of my archive, but again, all of these artifacts and a few additional ones will be available later. But I want to end by just acknowledging that the process of creating these fan materials required me to embody the spirit of Uncle Buddy's Fandom Funhouse. Taken as a whole, Art's Manifesto-like ramblings offer readers and listeners an approach to life and art that encourages play, experimentation, humor, and discovery. Though I didn't consciously set out to do this, constructing the archive turned out to be a way of enacting Art's or perhaps McDaid's ideals. My hope is that sharing this archive with you amplified the vital role of fandom in the preservation and transformation of art. The time, care, and willingness to immerse oneself in the world of an art object, the all-consuming nature of fandom, is an essential part of what keeps art alive and relevant. Significantly, that time and care and immersion is also an essential part of getting lost, of gleefully surrendering oneself to the funhouse. Thank you.